Did he rise from the dead? This is an important matter, and lots of historians say we cannot investigate the resurrection because that's not a historical matter, that's a supernatural matter, and you can't study supernatural matters.
For this section, I'm perfectly fine assuming that Jesus existed and he died on the cross. The argument surrounding Jesus' resurrection isn't really concerned about the earthly presence of Jesus. Even on the celestial model for Jesus, he's still resurrected, so obviously whether or not that was on earth or in the heavens, it didn't matter. I also agree with historians that say a resurrection is a supernatural event and the historical method can't validate a supernatural event.
Well, that's jumping the gun just a bit. If every explanation that is naturalistic falls short and falls very short of explaining what happened, then we have reason to believe that something supernatural may have happened. If there simply is no good explanation, naturalistically speaking, we can use a historical process of investigation to conclude that quite likely maybe something supernatural happened here.
This pivot on the resurrection is hilarious. First, Nabil spends minutes in this section discussing the overwhelming consensus for not only Jesus' existence, but his crucifixion. Even in his evidence, he attests to how overwhelming the consensus is. As soon as the scholarly consensus turns against him, he's like, whoa, wait a minute. We're not just going to sit here and listen to what all these historians have to say about this, are we? He attempts to save his case by stating that the naturalistic explanations fall short in their explanatory power. That's simply not the case, because any naturalistic explanation, however unlikely it is going to be far more likely than a supernatural explanation, like magical Jew resurrection.
So what happened when Jesus died? Shortly after his death, we take a look at what happened, and those historical scholars we've already referred to, in general, agree with three facts that are considered relatively incontrovertible. And I'm giving you what's called the minimal facts argument. If you want to look into this, it's called the minimal facts argument, primarily promoted by a man named Gary Habermas, who's written a book called The Historical Jesus. Also by his protege, Michael Licona, who's written a book called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. He wrote it alongside Gary Habermas. And he's also written his manifesto, a rather large book that serves well for curing insomnia. He's written that as well. Sorry, Mike. He's written that as well. And if you want to look at a very thorough investigation of the historical method on whether or not Jesus died, I suggest you take a look at this book published by Erdman's. Michael Licona is the author.
Oh, wait. First, Nabil hails the scholarly consensus about Jesus' existence and his crucifixion. And then when the historians turn against him, he shies away from it and he casts some doubt on the consensus of these historians. And now we're back to the consensus of historians? This feels like a roller coaster here. I mean, come on, Nabil. Are we supposed to trust the authorities or are we not? At this point, it just seems like blatant cherry picking. Also, he finally name drops the sources that we picked up on at the very beginning of the video. It's amazing how Nabil shrinks the minimal facts argument down to just 3 facts. Of course, at this time, Gary Habermas usually employs a different number of facts depending on the audience that he's talking to. It could range between 6 and 12 minimal facts. Put plain and simply, the minimal facts argument just fails to establish that a supernatural event happened. All the minimal facts do is just establish that the belief that Jesus resurrected from the dead started in the 1st century.
The argument runs as follows. Pretty much every scholar who studies this, at least a vast majority, if not virtually all scholars, conclude 3 things happened after Jesus died. Well, number 1, the first one is that Jesus did die on the cross, which we just looked at. Number 2, that the disciples, Jesus' disciples, all believed he had risen from the dead. So, the disciples truly believed that Jesus had risen from the dead, and according to most historical Jesus scholarship, Christianity wouldn't have gotten off the ground if it weren't for that fact.
Yeah, they sincerely believed it happened. That doesn't mean that it actually happened. They just sincerely believed it. This doesn't establish anything other than some Jewish Christians believed some shit in the 1st century. There was a lot of that going around at the time.
Fact number 3. Fact number 1 was Jesus died on the cross. Fact number 2, the disciples truly believed he had risen from the dead. Fact number 3, people who were enemies of Jesus or not his disciples also believed he had risen from the dead. Now, who are we talking about? We're talking specifically about two people, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, as it were.
People converting to a belief isn't proof that the belief is true. You need evidence to establish that some event actually happened. And this isn't evidence. At best, you could say that people were convinced of a belief, but there are also people that think that the world is flat. Does that mean that the world is flat now? No. It doesn't. So just because some people switch sides to come over to Christianity, that doesn't mean that Christianity is now true.
James, the brother of Jesus, did not follow Jesus during his lifetime. We see in the book of Mark that Jesus' family comes up and says to people around Jesus that he is out of his mind, basically, that he's crazy, which is what leads Jesus to say, "Who is my mother and brother and sister?" It's those who do the will of God. So Jesus' family is not on his side. It wasn't until after the resurrection, or supposedly the resurrection, when all of a sudden the disciple James becomes the brother of Jesus, James, becomes a leader of the Christian church.
Okay, first off, he's conflating James the pillar with James the supposed brother. But for the sake of argument, let's just say that there was some dude named James going around claiming to be the brother of Jesus. That doesn't mean that Jesus resurrected from the dead. Like I said before, the accounts in the Gospels are not historically reliable, and we can't determine between historical truth and fabrication. There is a narrative reason for Jesus' reaction to his family considering him to go crazy. The first rule of the Gospels is that the Jews are idiots. That's how the Gospels portrayed them. Next, the section of the Gospels proclaiming that all of those that do the will of God are Jesus' brothers and sisters are pushing a theological concept adhered to by Paul, that all baptized Christians were brothers and sisters of Christ. Regardless of all that though, someone claiming to be Jesus' brother finally pulling the stick out of his ass and believing his brother doesn't prove that Jesus resurrected from the dead.
And also Saul of Tarsus. Who is this Saul guy? Saul was the student of Gamaliel, one of the chief leaders of the Jews in the time. This man was primed and groomed to be a leader of Jews, a leader of Pharisees. He was going to have all kinds of power in the temple. He already had all kinds of power because he was able to deliver people to prison. He was given special permission to hunt Christians down. Yet this man was willing to go to his death over and over and over again for something. For what? He claims it was because he has seen the risen Jesus.
Okay. He had a sincere belief that Jesus resurrected from the dead. That's all. Like we've already pointed out in this video, sincere belief doesn't always indicate true belief. Just because Paul became convinced for emotional reasons, that doesn't mean that his belief is true to reality.
The earliest records of Jesus' resurrection say that 500 people saw him risen at the same time.
This comes from the Pauline Creed, and it's just a claim. You could say that 1,000 people saw the resurrected Jesus, but that doesn't actually mean that Jesus resurrected. This would prove that a lot of people sincerely believed they experienced the risen Jesus, but it doesn't prove that it actually happened. Also, as I've mentioned in other videos, this could be an interpolation. Paul could have originally said that Jesus just appeared over the Pentecost rather than to 500 people. This is due to a common spelling error that could have occurred in this section. Considering the shoddy nature of early Christian scribes, it's plausible that this could have happened. Regardless of that, this doesn't mean that Jesus actually resurrected from the dead.